Hello and welcome to Roundtable. Apart from saying that it condemned a violent crackdown on protesters in Sudan following October's military coup, the European Union has been noticeably silent on events in that country. It did suggest there might be sanctions, but 6 weeks on, why has nothing else been done? Well, Sudan's been suspended from the African Union, the World Bank has ended financial help to Sudan, and the US has cut its $700 billion emergency assistance package. What options are there for Europe to put pressure on the country's new rulers? Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. You know, the army general who led the military takeover, Abdel Fattah Burhan, is the same man who toppled Omar al-Bashir in 2019. He says he still plans to hold elections next year, and he's recently reinstated the man he toppled as prime minister. But are there countries that may be happy to see him hold on to power? Okay, let's take a look in detail at what's happening in Sudan. We welcome back to the roundtable Professor Allam Ahmed, the director of the Middle East Knowledge Institute. We say hello to Mohanad Hashim, just back from Sudan, who worked at the state broadcaster Sudan TV, content director there, had to leave in a bit of a hurry. And in Washington, D.C., we say hello once again to Cameron Hudson, who previously served as chief of staff to the U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan from 2009 to 2011. Come to your very personal experiences in just a moment, Mohanad, if I may. But I'm going to read this out from the man who is once again Sudan's prime minister, deposed in the coup, back in his office now. And he said these were some of the reasons why he accepted the offer from the military ruler. One was to stop the bloodshed. Second, to preserve the achievements of the last few years. Key among them, the achievements on the economy. We reached an agreement which in the circumstances is a workable agreement. It is something that avoided us going down a very slippery slope. These situations, if they're not managed well, could easily slip into chaos, civil wars. Alam, there have been suggestions that he knew a coup was coming and that this has all been engineered. Why, from his point of view, would that make any sense?
Thank you very much, David. And first, if you allow me to pay my full respect to all those we lost over the last 2-3 months, and also the last 2-3 years, and for a long time. Particularly children, and all my thoughts and heart with all these families, the parents and the mothers in particular. To come back to the question, I think the situation in Sudan is very complicated now, even much more complicated than 3 years. I think we discussed it in one of these few roundtables. Because Prime Minister Hamdok, during the last 2 years, number one, he received massive support from the Sudanese people. But in all commentators, myself included, we criticize him for not making the best use of that support, number one. Number two, he has not been very open with the Sudanese people. Yes, he claimed to be open about the economy, the situation, everything, even with the peace talk. But for many people, they don't see he was open enough to predict his move. Yes, many people, as you suggested or you said, they were expecting the coup to happen anytime. The generals themselves have been talking about it publicly in a couple of TV programs in Sudan, Hemeti, Burhan, they were all talking about this. And many people, they knew it's going to happen.
So you're saying Hamdok was a puppet in all of this? He was removed from power because people were talking about a coup and many people felt it should happen. He was then put back into office to make it look like he was a man with a bit of power once again, but he hasn't really got any...
Very close people to Prime Minister Hamdok, unfortunately, they told me personally, I can't just name them here, he was, to a large extent, and included in this discussion. He knew what is going to happen. And some people, unfortunately, they accuse him of being colluding with the military and all this saga.
Well, why would it benefit him, I suppose, would be the
That's
obvious
the question, because for many people, from one side, when Hamdok came to power, still many of the Sudanese people, they didn't realize that Hamdok was parachuted in Sudan. No one still knows the whole history of how Hamdok came to power. And there's many caveats here. He was, some people claim he was very associated with the previous regime. This is also known for the Sudanese people, but seems some people that try to overlook that. Secondly, they said he resigned from his UN job. He didn't resign from his UN job. He wasn't working at that time. So there's many ambiguity about Hamdok and what he came to do.
Okay, so I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll come back to him individually in just a little bit later on in the programme when we ask about is he the man to stay as Prime Minister if and when there are to be elections. Mohanad, let me ask you, tell me if I've got this slightly wrong. You were there just before the coup. There was an attempted coup, then you were there just before this coup.
Yes.
You were working at the state broadcaster. It became much more of a propaganda machine, you felt, and did you have to leave under difficult circumstances?
When I left, I went and I joined the state broadcaster in August last year as part of a team brought in to reform the state broadcaster and hopefully modernize it and make it into a pluralistic platform. What happened, I was there on the 21st of September when there was a coup attempt then, and it sort of set in motion a sequence of events that culminated with the coup of the 25th of October. But since the coup happened, the Sudan TV feels more like you're watching something from Omar al-Bashir's period in office. All the views that are shown are strategic experts or legal experts, people who clearly have affinities with the security apparatus in Sudan or the groups that support the coup, and they are all being rolled out ad infinitum since the 25th of October to say they don't call it a coup, they call it the corrective measures, and that these corrective measures, the narrative is that they were necessary, and now the spin is that the international community backs this deal.
Well, this was where I was going. I mean, there are those in Sudan who presumably are not at all happy, as we've seen from the protests, with what has happened. Are they equally dismayed by the reaction of the international community? I talked about being expelled from the African Union. I talked about the World Bank cutting its assistance, the United States, et cetera, pretty much nothing from the European Union. And an acceptance almost that this hasn't been such a bad thing to see Hamdok now back in office. Are they very disappointed with that?
That has to be qualified on many levels. The international community has initially condemned what happened, and with the popular rejection for the coup locally, the neighborhood resistance committees, which are these local networks of volunteers that have been leading this nationwide pro-democracy movement, in essence, has not been reliant or completely relying on the outside world on this particular point, because their set of demands is very radical with issues of negotiation and the politics of negotiating a deal.
Is it helpful to hear this from the European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell? And indeed, he's echoing what others have said as well. This, reinstalling Hamdok, is the first step to bring the transition back on track. Too many people have lost their lives since October the 25th. Unity and inclusiveness for a peaceful and democratic Sudan is what the people of Sudan want and need. It's a bit wishy-washy, isn't it?
Although, I mean, it's the language of diplomats. We haven't heard any stronger statement coming in, for that matter, even from the United States. But the point is, they have suspended a lot of packages and funds. The EU, the US, USAID, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. So, in a way, they said that they will watch the implementation of this deal and accordingly see what sort of measures to bring in.
But this is a military ousting of a civilian government. And why are they just sitting back and watching? Let me throw that one at you, Cameron.
Okay.
Why are they basically just sitting back and waiting to see what happens?
Well, I think the international community, as Mohanad had said, is trying to find a middle ground here. I think they've all acknowledged that this is not a perfect situation. I fear, though, that what they have been aiming for is the restoration of Prime Minister Hamdok as the symbol of the kind of civilian-led democratic transition that Sudan was on for the past 2 years. And I think the fundamental nature of the prime minister, the fundamental view of him from the street is now altered because he's made a deal essentially in secret without consulting with the political parties or the people who've been taking to the streets. He cut this deal to bring himself back in to, as he said, avoid future bloodshed and to maintain the economic reforms that his government saw through. But I think we have to be really, I think, suspicious now of those motives, because the one thing that hasn't changed in any of this is the military. The military has only further entrenched itself in power through this deal, and militarily.
Which is sort of leading me to wonder whether, in fact, there was not some satisfaction, not obviously expressed, but there was not some satisfaction with the fact that the military were in power and the country was going to remain relatively stable. And to some extent, that might be what outsiders really want.
Well, I think that what we have done in the conversation about Sudan is we have confused and conflated what stability means and how you deliver stability in the long term, right? And so I think that international diplomats have been focused on kind of near-term stability, which is getting these people out of the streets, stopping them from protesting, stopping them from being eyeball to eyeball with the military. That's what people are afraid of in the international community, because they're afraid of another June 3rd type massacre. And if that happens, then diplomacy breaks down. I think the problem is that puts the international community at odds with the street protesters, who are clearly seeing this as their last best opportunity to make some kind of fundamental change in the governance structure of this country.
Okay, let's hear right now from, it's not representative, but one street protester pretty much echoing what you just said.
Hamdok came back without any power and without any decisions. Why did you come back, Hamdok? The Sudanese people are on the street. The Sudanese people don't want Burhan. The Sudanese people are on the street.
So Alam, frustration from the Sudanese people, not just at the fact that Hamdok is now back in office, but also perhaps at the fact that the outside world almost seems to want the status quo to remain.
And I think if I add just one comment,
yes,
very important regarding the international community, I think there's two major issues for the international community. First, when Prime Minister came into power, he was very popular. Anyone likes him, and the Sudanese people really could have done everything for him to restore the country. That was misjudged by the international community. In my opinion, people was so, if the euphoria of Hamdok was, people have been deprived from democracy, everything for the last 30 years. So he was like the savior, the Nelson Mandela, he's kind of that reformer. But the international community didn't realize how much of that support or that love has been demolished over less than 1 year when people start to struggle with bread, with electricity, with
prices rising,
and hospitals.
Who's responsible for Hamdok's failure? Was it, in a sense, the military that allowed him to fail by letting his economic policies flounder, by running down the hospitals, by seeing the prices of bread and other goods go up, because they knew that if he lost popularity, they would be the ones to gain it?
Hamdok himself, his character is not that charismatic leader who could lead a nation out of that situation. Unfortunately, that's one of the... Secondly, the international community, which supported Sudan massively, the US, UK, France, Germany, Spain, and so on, Norway, they were very keen, they are very hungry for a quick, if you like, turnout. They want things to happen quickly. So their investment in Sudan to become a democratic country and to transform that part of Africa, they were very in hurry, in rush. That's number two. Number three, which is quite critical here, according to, if you look carefully to lots of the statements Hamdok delivered in the public media over the last 2 years, when there's a crisis after a crisis, he kind of hinted he is getting things done with the military, not actually the civilian partners. So if you read them carefully, and I have someone in the Facebook read them carefully, you can feel Hamdok is simply saying he was able to get things happening better and easy with the military. But no one really focused on that. Number two...
Well, you're going to have to help me. You're going to have to help me with this one a little bit, because if the military wanted him to fail, and yet he was working with the military... Okay, Cameron, I wasn't going to ignore you, Mohanad, at the moment, but Cameron, you say absolutely not. I'll be with you in a second.
Sure.
Cameron.
Well, no, I don't think that the military wanted Hamdok to fail. The one point that the military and Hamdok seem to agree on now is that they don't want politicians trying to administer governance in the country. That's been very clear. This deal between Hamdok and the military cuts out the Forces for Freedom and Change, cuts out the political parties out of this process. And that's what makes this entire thing so incomprehensible, because we keep saying, or they keep saying, we need to have a technocratic government. We need to have a technocratic government to make these decisions. We need to keep the politicians out. That's what the military wanted. That's what Hamdok says he wants. He can't lead a country if politicians are part of his cabinet, right? And yet all of this is being done to prepare the way for democratic elections for who to take over the country? The politicians. And so I don't see how this kind of undemocratic act is going to lead to a democratic outcome at the end of the next 2 years.
Well, you must have given that some thought, and I'll come back to you to see if you've come up with any kind of solution, however baffling you may think it is. But Mohanad, I want to come to you and ask you, going back to what Alam was saying about how his family would not take his father to hospital because things have got so bad out there. Describe the time when you were there, how life for ordinary Sudanese changed.
Life is difficult for the ordinary Sudanese, and if anything, if we're to take it during the past couple of years of the transition, it has gotten more difficult. The prices of commodities became more expensive. The liberalization of the currency to appease the international, or to kind of like to address the international requirements of the international finance institutions, came at a very hefty price. It didn't help that, for example, the Forces for Freedom and Change were never united, that there wasn't a clear economic strategy. But somewhere in between where Cameron is and Professor Allam, the real spoiler in this perhaps might have been all along on the economic sphere, at least, could be considered and thought of as the military. Because they were keen to get the military off a list of sanctions to get Sudan back into the international community. But it leaves key issues outside the control of the Ministry of Finance. And on this one, we need to bring the issue of the gold, for example. And it's been widely reported that the gold in Sudan brings somewhere upwards of $8 to $10 billion a year. If those type of claims are substantiated, then the economic hardship that the Sudanese people are currently in has been manufactured and orchestrated by the people who control the mining sector, i.e. the Rapid Support Forces, the military's oversight over its huge industrial complex, which controls, as Hamdok said on many occasions, 80% of the economy.
As happened in Egypt, where we know that the military happened in Egypt. So which brings me to this point. Sorry, I know you've got so much you want to say, but we only have a limited amount.
Something key here is that Hamdok, perhaps he might have miscalculated, but I think the international community puts in a lot at Hamdok, ignoring the Sudanese street, which is at the moment has bypassed Hamdok. The Sudanese street feels that they need a new leader. The Forces for Freedom and Change and the political club could come up with nominees for different people and relatively put them for popular vote or referenda even in the streets. Okay. The question is...
I am going to have to stop you because I need to bring Cameron back in and we are...
But one point important...
in a minute, save that thought. I posited the idea at the very beginning of the program that there might be other countries besides those that have expressed outrage at this, but more particularly local, relatively regionally anyway, that might want to see Burhan and the military in some form remain in power. I've just mentioned Egypt just then. The United Arab Emirates has been mentioned to me on another occasion. Why would those countries, and if there are any others, please add them, why would they want to see the military remain in charge?
Well, I think, there are a number of reasons why you would see that Gulf state countries would be interested in a military government there. Obviously, they have keen national security interests in Sudan. Currently, they want a pliable government that they can work with. They obviously don't want the example of what a popular Arab uprising looks like to overthrow a military government. They're worried about that view. Certainly, the Egyptians had their own experience in that. So I think there are a number of reasons why I think the kind of middle powers in the region look very favorably on a military government. I would say that one country that we haven't heard a lot of discussion about, however, is Russia. And there has been increasing calls for an investigation into what Russia has been doing in Sudan. We know that militarily, diplomatically, and even from a sort of cybersecurity perspective, the Russians have been very active in trying to not just support the military, but I think more importantly, undermine democracy in Sudan.
Just for the sake of instability, is Russia's interest in the mineral wealth, as Mohanad may have suggested, or is it just to keep instability?
Well, I think it's all of the above. They don't want to see a democratic country emerge in this part of the world. They have contracts in supporting General Hemeti's gold mining interests in the country. They are supporting them from an intelligence perspective, but they're also thwarting U.S. interest and European interest in the country, which is why I think we heard General Hemeti the other day in an interview with a European news outlet sounding very much like Belarusian leader Lukashenko, saying that he was going to unleash a tidal wave of refugees coming in towards Europe.
Well,
That's
hang on. I think you're referring to somebody also known as Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, the same person. And this is exactly what he said. Because of our commitment to the international community and the law, we are keeping these people together. He was talking about the fact that there were refugees kept in camps. If Sudan will open the border, a big problem will happen worldwide. That is a threat. If you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to let refugees just go right the way across Africa to where you are, and we know that that's a problem for you.
Absolutely, and this is the irony, and I think shows General Dagalo's true colors. He's a warlord and a thug, and here he is literally threatening the European Union into trying to recognize and support the government that he sits atop of.
Okay, which leads me to the question we had at the very beginning. Why, if that is the case, is the European Union doing nothing? Is it because it is worried about what Dagalo has said there, that he might make his threat real about opening the borders and letting refugees through? Or is it for another reason? Why is it letting this man issue threats and intimidation and doing nothing about it?
If I may, Professor Allam, I think the European Union has always played politics by consensus, and at the moment with the crises like COVID and what's happening on their eastern border with Russia, there are bigger concerns. But also, it has been Angela Merkel's pivot towards Africa since 2016 to try to stem the migrants who are coming from a particular region, which is the Sahelian belt, on which Sudan lies. And if we're to go to what General Dagalo says, he is actually a factor in driving people away by overseeing the war effort in Darfur. The situation in Chad doesn't help. The situation in Mali, where there was also a military coup, and in Guinea, where there are military coups. So the problem is, at the moment, the EU is trying to negotiate for stability, perhaps across the Sahel, but at the same time, it's these people who are supposed to be maintaining stability are drivers for the migration north.
So here we have a European Union that either has more important things to deal with, in its opinion, therefore it is incapable of handling a situation which is seeing instability brought to one of the most important countries in Africa, or what?
Two things. Number one, the EU, this is a major issue for all these countries in Europe, in particular in the UK and France and Germany and so on. So if Sudan is really, as I said, it is really a border where you can get people from West Africa, even as Boko Haram.
Alam, I'm sorry to hustle you, but the question is the EU doing what it can, or is it incapable or unwilling? I know the situation takes so much explaining.
Incapable and unwilling, because just give you an example. When our foreign minister at that time went to Sudan, he supported Sudan by $50 million. And many of the Sudanese senior people said, Alam, what is your minister is giving us here? $50 million Sudanese people could have collected. So we all suffer here financially. The European Union did not support as much as people expected it. And there's a couple of things. For example, like Spain.
I wish I could give you a couple of things. But whenever anybody says that towards the end of a program, my heart drops. Cameron, a quick one here. Is this going to be allowed to just amble on, kept in the sidelines by the major powers? What would it take for it to go up the list of important things in terms of jobs to be done for the outside world?
Well, I think what the outside world right now is trying to do is minimize its losses and preserve some of its own investments in this country. And so they are willing to avoid a worst case scenario by accepting a less than good scenario, right? And I think that's the problem is that they've settled on this kind of least common denominator outcome that they can accept the military as long as it has a civilian face. The question is, will the international community really step up and try to dislodge the military in some way? And I think the answer to that is sadly no, because there's too great a risk of what the military will do if we take on a more aggressive action, which is why you're not hearing the United States or others talk about sanctions against the military generals. They're not even using the word coup. All of a sudden, we've sort of forgotten that this coup even happened, and we're pretending like we are back on the track of a democratic outcome when, in fact, the military has only consolidated
heads in the sand
over the
for a variety of reasons. I have to stop you there, Cameron. Thank you very much indeed. Though, of course, interest in this may well change if Russia goes into Ukraine, as has been suggested, takes its eye off the ball of what's happening in Sudan, and others see it as an opportunity to work on what the problems are. It's all very, very complicated. But thank you for listening to our experts who hopefully cleared up some of the mess. We appreciate the time you took to watch this programme. From me, David Foster, from my guest on Roundtable, goodbye. I hope to have your company next time. Until then.